You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games, where two GMs talk about the recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss a question from a listener. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, is my good friend and my GM colleague, Jody.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Little quick hiatus, but we're back in the ear holes where we belong.
Indeed, indeed. So today's episode focuses on a question from a listener. So Jody, instead of taking us to the table, take us to the email.
So from a long-time listener and first-time caller running an online mega dungeon of Shadowdark sessions, our intrepid GM writes in as follows. My party was effectively 2 levels deep in the dungeon. Our PCs found themselves in the center of a large inter-faction combat. A character was prone, surrounded by giant hyenas, the character heavily wounded, and fully separated from his allies by several enemies. The prone player's fellow adventurers were also wounded, low on spells, and stood far on the other side of a large room. The GM asked the player of the prone character if his character would be willing to fight the giant hyena that was approaching him, or if he'd play dead. The player opted for the latter. The hyena successfully picked up the character in its jaws, carried it away down a corridor to the east, away from the conflict and from the remaining party members. The players and characters knew that this hallway to the east led to the heart of the Knoll hyena-controlled territory. They also knew that a friendly NPC, who they were interested in rescuing, was being held in that very location. When it was the player's turn, the GM asked him if he'd try to free himself or continue to play dead in the mouth of the giant hyena. Now, at this point, the player explained that he'd rather have his character free himself than be captured and, of course, possibly eaten, but that his character being brought to the Knolls is where he felt the game's narrative was going, and so he'd continue to play dead to serve the narrative. Now, at this point, our GM interrupts the game to assure the player that this was not a planned plot, and that any narrative was just a naturally evolving one. Hearing this, the player opted to escape and fight off the giant hyena, was able to do so, and against all odds, escape along with the rest of the party. Now, our listener, the GM, shared with us that he regretted jumping in, as he thinks that he would have enjoyed the story that likely would have evolved from there, though the GM is glad the party wasn't divided and he didn't have to navigate that mess. So our listener writes, do you think I did the right thing? Should I have stayed silent and not swayed the player either way? I would have loved to see the story evolve naturally, but I don't want players to operate under the assumption I'm trying to tell a specific story or even lead them anywhere in particular in the interest of moving along some kind of premeditated plot. What are your thoughts?
All right, Jody, let's gather around the fire and kind of unpack what's going on here. So, full disclosure, this is actually the first time that this is hitting my ears, and I'm actually engaging with this because you were the recipient of this particular email and of this correspondence. So I get the benefit of not actually having thought about this until several seconds ago, much like the listeners. So what I want you to do is tell me, what was your snap reaction to this when you read it? And actually, just why did you want to talk about this on the show? Like, what did you see here as being like fodder for a good discussion?
Well, what I really liked about this that jumped out to me and why I was like, oh, I think this is a good spot. One is we've been asking you listeners to chime in with your questions. So doggone it, when we got one, I wanted to throw it out there that we mean it. We're not just saying it. The second thing was I genuinely went, I think you and I are going to have fairly different opinions about this question of the player has pulled away from the story to say, I think we're supposed to do this. So I'll go along with that. And then the GM jumping in to stay at that level and go, well, I don't know. And my reaction is I, as a GM, would share the listener's concerns about affirming that kind of meta knowledge. I think my default state, and this is where I think we might have some difference, is my default state would be, hey, you know what you know? You should make the decision you think you want to make. And that's it. And no discussion of what sort of meta information and reaffirming in that moment there should be. That's the way I would lean. And that's to me, the crux of this is we're talking here about meta information, about above table things, not the moment where this character is being dragged away. And I wouldn't have wanted to break that tension in scene to talk about what's the story. So what are your thoughts? That was the point that really resonated with me.
Yeah, so I probably would have done what our listener did. I probably would have allowed for a brief discussion of what is going on here. Is there a plot? And I think that's where you and I differ a lot in our GMing. Is I'm much more willing to pull the players out of the game than you are. We talked about this a while back when we were discussing what happened during our PvP situation. Mm-hmm. And you and I had somewhat different ways that we would adjudicate a PvP situation. Like I was maybe overly cautious about checking in with the table, and I think you could be quoted as saying kind of like, let her rip.
Yep. That was an accurate quote.
I think that is evidenced here, where you are much more willing to let the game play out and let not just the characters, but also the players be kind of in a state of confusion. I tend to worry more about that. Like I tend to worry more about my players being in a place where they might feel discomfort. Whereas I know this about you as a player. You actually sort of enjoy that state of not like, I don't mean discomfort from a negative sense, but I mean like of not really being sure what's going on is a place that you're okay with.
Yeah, very much so. Both as a player and to a degree as a GM. Like, and I've would say in the last few years has been the single biggest piece of working on my GMing, that assumption as a player of being in nebulous space is okay, because my attesting is you can't get it wrong. Like, you're not making a wrong choice. No matter what the player chose here in the mouth of the hyena, it wasn't a wrong choice. There was no foul to be had. So if there's no foul, then just go for it. Trust your gut. But is there misinformation? And that's
right.
The piece that I've heard you over the years always worry about, that I think is valid. Like, and I'm not dismissing in any way.
Yeah.
Is there misinformation here? Is the player unclear of the stakes or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think, man. This is a great conversation. I think there's two things here. I think I want to kind of bring the lens maybe over to something else, which is like preconceived notions on the part of players. Now, obviously, like we can't audit this listener's entire game, and it doesn't sound like here that there were like breadcrumbs or like a linear narrative that was kind of like leading to this moment that players might have been falsely led to believe that they quote unquote should do something. But I think like there's a lot of situations where GMs, even if they're doing their level best, not to lead players down a path that we can get far down a path and then realize we're on one.
Right.
Right. And I guess my follow-up question I would have, even if you have the best of intentions of allowing your party and your players to make decisions that are theirs and theirs alone and drive the story, have you created a situation where, unbeknownst to you or even against your better judgment, I guess not against better judgment, but unbeknownst to you, you've created a situation where you've maybe signaled to the players that there are certain checkpoints or certain plot coupons that they're supposed to collect to get to the next scene. And I don't know, you're much more comfortable with linear narratives,
mm-hmm.
and I just don't run that way. So I get really hung up on this, actually. But even I have realized, even in our games that I'm running right now, I realized there's definitely places where I've pushed to get the party into different scenarios. And I didn't really mean to, but that was kind of maybe how it was read at the table. I don't know.
Right. And I think in the gray spectrum that is gaming and the ever-present necessity of GMs providing the player group direction so that they can make informed decisions, because a true sandbox, as we've talked about before, is a true platonic, ideal, no boundary sandbox. You can do anything you want. You are in the middle of a grass and field. Where do you go? It is terrible. Like that, there's nothing there to make a decision off of. And there is but one answer and but one way, and this is the way, and thou shalt be a third level halfling, and thou will answer the riddle thrice upon the knocking of the thrush.
Right.
Okay, that's also not fun for the opposite reasons. So I think that's the other kind of underlying piece here and what I hear you saying when you go unintentionally leading the party to a narrative, I wonder that piece in the description of the scene, that the players were aware that there was an NPC in with the gnolls that was captured, and because they'd picked up those breadcrumbs or those plot coupons, whether it was that's just what showed up or not, this player had internalized that as, oh, there's some story to be had there. And I think that's a really great point. And I don't know as a GM necessarily right off the bat of, okay, so what do you do with that? Like,
yeah,
I'm sensing that my players have picked up on this thread and might be keen to pursue it. So then do you start helping them to follow that thread?
This is a much better way to describe it.
Or do you just continue to throw random breadcrumbs? When I get in trouble as a GM, I keep throwing random breadcrumbs, and then my players go, there's a lot of different flavored breadcrumbs here. Do they actually go together?
Well,
and I say no.
Yeah.
Don't.
and as a player at your table, here's what I'll say is, maybe a different player would have a different reaction, but like for me, I want some signal, not that we've chosen the right thing, but that we've chosen something, that this is a thread that can be pulled on. I either need there to be very clear direction at the beginning of the campaign that like every thread is pullable, or there needs to be like clear communication that I pull on a thread and something happens and suddenly there is new information that has been revealed.
Right.
And that information has there's another, you open the door and there's a hallway, and there's another door. And then you open that door and there's a hallway and there's another door, right? Like that kind of sense, that makes it sound very linear, but whatever, you open the door and there's a room and there's 5 doors. Long story short, metaphor aside, extended metaphor aside, I just like a little bit of reassurance at the table that I'm not just, I'll be honest with you, I'm not wasting time. I don't like wasting time at the table going and barking up a tree that there ain't no reason to bark up just because, quote unquote, the world is real and the world is, I don't want to do that. I'm not playing a role-playing game so that I can do menial, boring tasks.
Right.
And so that runs up for me as a player. That can create some friction that I'm not super proud of some of the ways that I have acted on that at the table at times, but I do think that it's a legitimate reason to have this conversation. That's where I'm coming from, is like, I just want to know that the thing that I've chosen, that there's some there. Right.
And it gets into this, so taking it back to the top line of, so this is a mega dungeon exploration. That's what this group is doing. And again, we don't have all the clues. We don't have all the context. We're working with what we have. But again, it's an interesting conversation about, for me, of how much information and when. And I mean, I cannot help but immediately be thinking about Sly Flourish and the lazy GM prep and secrets and clues, right? That here are things that can be learned. Well, the determiner on what can be learned in the example you're giving me of your style of play as a player, like what you want, those secrets and clues should have some linearity to them, some meaning to them.
Right.
They should lead somewhere. Whereas in a very realistic living world, not every clue is going to lead you somewhere. In fact, the vast majority may not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what this player's picked up on is, we've bumped into this stack of clues.
Right.
Therefore, the following. Now, there is the the option that I think is worth throwing out there of the GM in the moment. And this is hey, we all are making a million decisions right on the fly as fast as we can. You're not going to catch everything. So this is in no way a chastisement of the GM. There's the question of, if you notice the player saying, oh, well, that guy's important, so we should go talk to them. Do you, taking the Slifer or Seeker and clues, go, welp, there's the next person that's going to deliver meaningful information? This gets into is that then a different form of quantum ogre? The informational quantum ogre, and you validate their decisions as the decisions are happening, or the mega dungeon is, and you either go down there or you don't.
Yeah. So I want to point out a specific individual in the Arcane Library Discord who I have a lot of respect for, but I just clearly run a different game than they do. And I'm going to get their handle wrong. I guess I'll post their handle. So this is at Evon named or Evon named did.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, handles are what handles are. But long story short, this member of the Arcane Library Discord, legendary Arcanist, which means has participated in the Discord for a long time, has posted a lot of messages, has run so many learn to play games, and is a huge advocate for the system and for just playing games, runs tons of games online. And I have seen them post some things, and I'll give you kind of an example of one of them that was posted recently as of the recording of this. This is in response to someone creating a random encounter in the wilderness. Okay. And they were worried that the encounter wasn't going to be engaging or interactable or kind of like an event or a thing that players would want to engage with, and the players would just kind of cruise by. This is Yvonne named response. This might be a little bit sensational, but one of the best things you can learn is to intentionally try not to entertain your players. Just put something in front of them and see what they do. Let them take the lead. Use some dice to help you determine things if needed behind the screen. But honestly, if you can get comfortable doing nothing, it's a pretty freeing feeling to know you don't always have to be hamming it up for your players. Now, this is in line with lots of various posts that this individual has posted over the time that I've been a part of the Discord. So that's number one. And number two, I think a lot of their advice is super solid. I don't, however, always agree with the sort of don't prep anything, like just let it all happen at the table gameplay. And this person has been pretty critical of Sly Flourishes, lazy GM prep in the past as being just another form of railroading. And I really respect the fact that they are consistent in their views, that they articulate them well, and that they are clearly an advocate for Shadowdark. And I think it's interesting because this particular quote came up earlier today at the time of recording, and my response was that I agree, but there was a lot of space between hamming it up and putting some thought into an encounter. And I think that what we're talking about here is like a spectrum of how to both prep and also run games that is really difficult to nail down.
Yeah. What jumped out to me in that statement that resonated with my style of GMing, because I think anytime you're looking at or listening to GMing advice of any kind, be it two knuckleheads on some goofy Shadowdark podcast or anywhere else, that the first thing we do is we go, what do I agree with? And that's even a really strong, frankly, reading and listening strategy in terms of cognitively processing information is you go, what do I agree with? Okay, I have an agreement point with this person. Now let's look at our differences.
Right.
So then you are speaking common language. And what jumped out to me as an agreement point is present information to your players and then be willing to step back and take your GMing self out of it. Frankly, when I feel like my game is humming along at its best, and I have a group of players whose interest and style of play is meshing really well with my GMing style. That's a good descriptor of what it feels like. Is I get to go, here's information, and they're going to play with it. And I'm genuinely listening to what they're saying, but I'm not a part of it until they indicate to me, we need you to be a part of it. And then I go, okay, cool. And I'm going to come back in and I'm going to present a scene and I'm going to fade out. But that's a stylistic choice for me. As is so often the limitation of the internet and internet discussions is the nuance between ham it up and totally withdraw. I don't even think the person's post is saying those two things, but very quickly the internet is good at chopping up and parsing into like, you can only ham it up or be totally absent as a GM, and therefore, and this listener's question is that we went over about the hyenas and the separated party and the NPC at the end of the Eastern hallway, and that's a great instance of this nuance, right? Of that prep and how much am I going to deliver? And, it goes back to something you comedically to me at this point, I genuinely get a chuckle out of it. Early on, I mean, like maybe second or third game we played of like, so Jody, what style of game do you run? And I'm like, I don't know. I still to this day, I'm like,
hilarious.
I run a D&D game. And it wasn't till many years later that I even could understand what it was you wanted from me in that question. But I think there's validity in that, in the terms of this example of the hyenas in the Eastern hallway and the downed character being dragged away and the NPC and et cetera, of the GM maybe reasserting here to just say, hey, you guys, you're just exploring a space. Whatever happens, happens. Yeah. And in that instance where my gut reaction says, no, don't say anything, let them have the tense moment, you can tell them after the game, hey, I just want to reiterate, or send an email that's a follow-up. Hey, I just want to be clear. Like, I'm not pushing an agenda. But even in the moment when they did it and broke and said, hey, I just want you guys to be clear, I'm not pushing an agenda here. You make your own choices. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it's grounding for players because, like you were saying, it gives the option of, are these threads meaningful?
The one thing I want to point out in addition to that is something you said kind of jumped out at me. You kind of provoked this thought that there's some things in the narrative that we were given that I want to kind of pull out and tease out. The first is that there's an encounter, okay? Specifically, it's an encounter with two major factions, that there's giant hyenas that have presumably they've been involved in a protracted combat. And the point that I want to really hone in on is that this hyena picks up the character and carries them away. I think this is one of those things that, first of all, makes total sense. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Sure. However, I often get frustrated when we get to conversations about railroading or there being a narrative, which is kind of at the core of what we're talking about here.
Sure.
Is there a core narrative or is it kind of, free choice or whatever? Ultimately, the GM has so much power that the idea of there being a truly open world or like a completely free decision space is just it's not real. There are too many instances where we as GMs have to make decisions that will have implications and signal to the players, because we're playing a social game. They will signal to the players stuff that we don't know we're actually signaling. So when the hyena picks this character up and goes down the corridor, I can see a player thinking in their head, and the information is here in front of us, that there's a friendly NPC that they knew was being held in that location, that there's all of this narrative buildup, even though this makes sense as what, quote unquote, what the hyena would do.
Mm-hmm.
It feeds into this
right
thought process of this player that is reinforcing this narrative. And so this is what I was talking about at the top of the show, that like, even if you GM in kind of the platonic ideal of an open world or open dungeon game, I just don't think it's possible to do that in a way that from time to time won't end up with situations like this. And I just don't think I think GMs beat themselves up about this, especially when they come to the OSR, and they they don't give themselves any patience and don't beat yourself up about beating yourself up about this, please. That would be bad too. But like, I think it's just important for all of us to realize like this is a hard thing to do, and a lot of the stuff that we're doing, we're making these decisions, and there's a bunch of people around the table, or in this case on your Discord call or on your Zoom call or whatever. You're signaling to them a whole bunch of stuff when you're making these decisions, and this just to me is just like a mistaken, not identity, mistaken
stakes.
I don't know.
Mistaken stakes.
Yeah, there you go.
That should be on a T-shirt.
That
is my GMing T-shirt. Mistaken stakes.
This is a big bugaboo of mine.
Yeah,
is that when people come to the OSR and they see these tenets, right? That like players have all these choices, and then their players feel like there's a narrative or whatever, and then we beat ourselves up about it. I don't know. It really bothers me because it comes back to the fact that I just want this hobby to be as open and accepting of different play styles as possible, and it sometimes feels like this, that people we set them up for failure when we describe our games in these like grandiose terms of being like the players have ultimate freedom. They can do whatever they want. But I've decided that they're starting in a town, or I've decided that they're starting in a dungeon. You've already, by
starting
them in the dungeon, you've made the biggest choice.
Sure.
And I'm sorry, but like I just don't buy the fact that like that choice doesn't have the same meaning as like, I don't know. I don't want to get too far afield here, but this is one of the things that bothers me, and one of the things that I feel like people need to hear, that like it is okay to make decisions about what is happening in a game.
Yeah, and is helpful to your players.
Yes.
So I want to highlight, I want to take this a little different direction. Is let's look at that player, and you started doing this.
Yeah. I got a little far afield on my little hobby horse there, but
and it's a good hobby horse, because so often when we hear railroading, or if you prefer the term that's
I railroaded the conversation, Jody. I'm sorry.
Or did you stage coach it? We're stage coaching. So if you stage coach your adventure, that always gets framed in the 1 to 11 scale of Spinal Tap, that it's the 11. When you say railroading, we're only talking about the 11. Not having an organized plot that the players can follow and feel a sense of resolution over, which is a good thing.
It's a totally acceptable and fun way to play.
Right. It is, in fact, I'd say the industry standard at this point for the greater RPG industry. So this player, I want to give credit to the player, frankly, because they took, from what we're seeing, they took a breadcrumb about some NPC that was in their mind. Their character's prone and being dragged around by a giant hyena. That's a high stress. And they're going, hey, I want to play along with my GM. So I'm going to make a decision that helps the story keep moving the way I think and credit to a player doing that. Now, player breaking character or moment to say it, much like the GM's breaking character. But then you had the discussion and decisions were made, and they made a heroic escape, and that's fun. And that's the punchline on the story. And that's where you want these to end up. The only way to RPG wrong is if this discussion elevates and the game stops.
Right.
And literally in my teen years lived that out multiple times. Don't let that happen.
This is the therapy, the
This is
D&D therapy
with
session
Jody.
that you need, Jody. This is the who hurt you conversation that we have to have.
Well, we're not gonna. I'm not ready to bear those deep dark scores, and those skeletons can stay in the closet and be animated at a later date. But I do want to say that kudos to the player for being engaged and invested in the narrative that they perceived.
Mm-hmm.
Kudos for the GM for erring on the case of let's make sure everybody's clear. And then kudos to both and all players involved for the game moved forward to what sounds like a pretty kick-butt fight and resolution, and we didn't lose the thread and the excitement that is this cool moment of a character being dragged away by a giant monster.
It rules.
Hyena.
Totally
so
rules.
much so that we haven't explained Why does it totally make sense that these gnolls have giant hyenas and that this giant hyena would be dragging away this character to it? There is so much there that we, and if you are familiar with this kind of stuff, go, well, yeah, obviously that's correct. That's awesome. That's so cool.
Well, and that's a level of narrative agreement in terms of what is happening in the scene from the player perspective and GM perspective that tells me that this whole scene was operating on a sort of narrative level that was great. I want to take this conversation in a slightly different direction and talk about the fact that this was an online game. Whether or not you feel like, and I have thoughts on this, but I'm gonna put it to you. You don't really run very many games online, and
Zero.
I'm wondering if this is why. Not like this specifically, but like because I will tell you just from my experience, it is much easier to have communication breakdowns when you're playing online. And I'm wondering if like something like this is why you eschew that style of getting together and playing RPGs.
No, it's not.
Cool. End of conversation. Let's
And
move on.
we'll move on. No, so my reasons for
No
not
notes.
running online are, one, I love my toys. I got to have some miniatures on the table and some dungeons and some stuff. I have a problem, and I love my problem, and I don't want to stop, and I don't care if it kills me under all the gray plastic and resin. The other part is I am only as technologically savvy as I absolutely must be. I am not a techno fan. It's a slow grind for me to learn new technology. So while I've been lucky enough to be a player in a nice handful of online games over the years, the learning to do this online as a GM is just not the juice of what an RPG is to me can't happen online. Now, that said, as a player, 100% very aware of how these things can happen. I am remembering a moment where a dearly loved PC died, frankly, because of some lack of information. And I don't know if it was the onlineness of it, but it didn't help. And we lost in a long-running Cthulhu game a very dear character, and it was a bummer. And we finished the campaign with new characters and new guy who dis, and it was great. But it was the one kind of little smudge on this whole giant campaign was like, man, that sucks. That character died. And it didn't suck because boo-hoo, we missed the character. It was like, it felt unsporting because those spatial considerations are really hard, I think, online. And there is a spatial logistics issue to this encounter. You have a big room with multiple factions and somebody's getting pulled away. And I've heard people say that they think that online games are actually better at handling that, but the interruption to get the clarification, it's a necessary evil. So I mean, I'm kind of not the best person because I don't run online games, but I can see where this and you have me leaning more towards, no, GM, I think it was good that you said, hey, hang on, stop, let's make sure we're clear here, rather than the ride the lightning let her rip of me of like, I want to savor that suspense of that character being dragged down a hall. That's a cool cinematic moment. With an online game, I'm just not informed enough. So you have run a no small amount of online games over the last few years. So where does that factor in for you? What's your experience with this? What prompted the question, really?
So I don't know if other GMs who run online, listeners, if you are one of those people, I would love to hear your thoughts on this specifically, because this is just my personal experience. Obviously, both of us do very social jobs. We are teachers working with young people, and so our whole kind of day is spent reading body language. It is spent engaging with young people, both verbally and non-verbally. That's kind of what we've built a career doing. And I would argue that is actually rather helpful when talking about running RPGs, just from a pure communication standpoint and understanding people's standpoint. I find that running online is super enjoyable. I think using VTTs can solve a lot of the spatial problems and can solve a lot of the tactical problems. They don't make up for not having miniatures, Jody. They do not. But I do think that there are lots of benefits to running online that are not enough to make me want to do it full time in any way. But there are a number of benefits. The one downside, and the thing that I think is speaking to me here, is very specific, and I don't know if it's the case with this incident. It is tough to get out ahead of problems. And what I mean by that is when you're sitting at the head of a table and you can see everyone's body language and someone else is talking either in character or asking questions, or it's somebody else's, it's somebody else's turn in Shadowdark parlance, right? Like we're going around the table and we've arrived here. If there's somebody you can see is slightly disgruntled or has a puzzled look on their face, it is really useful to be able to read the table. And before you get there, and you can try and give some context and just kind of rescue the situation before it's a problem. Now, I don't know if that would have helped here.
Yeah.
But I do think that these kinds of communication breakdowns are more likely to occur online, at least in my experience. I just had one of these a couple weeks ago. There was a miscommunication between my sister and I that resulted in me having to apologize for being kind of not a jerk, but just genuinely misreading the situation and feeling like the characters in this 5th edition game weren't progressing, right? They were being too tentative.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think this is, not to go on for too long, but I did this exact same thing. I'm just now realizing this. I broke the game, right? I broke the narrative, and out of game, I was like, hey, you guys are heroes. What are we doing here? Like, we're being very tentative.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a good idea. It was bad.
Right.
And I was getting not frustrated, but I was like, dude, you chose to come here. This is like a cool space. You're exploring it. And all of a sudden now you want to pull back and you don't want to, it doesn't seem like you want to engage with this location. What's going on here? I just didn't read the room, man. Like it's
a lot harder to read the room online.
It's a lot harder to read the room. I screwed up. It was my fault. And I had to apologize for taking everybody out of the game and wasting some time, my least favorite thing to do at the table. And it was primarily because I just didn't have the benefit of being able to like see everybody's body language, see what's going on with my players in a way that would have allowed, I think I would hope for me to have taken a different tact and not had those kind of like a game breaking moment. It wasn't a catastrophe, but it wasn't my best moment as a GM.
Well, kudos to you for owning that here publicly and airing your shame. Good for you. But I will say, like you said, the parallel is undeniable of like, hey, GM stepped in and I think that's now I am seeing, thank you, the why talk about this as an online game is we have no way of knowing the tone in which the player expressed, I'd really rather free myself than be dragged back, but it feels like we should go check that out. So I'll just stay limp for the narrative. We don't know the tone. Like the person could have sounded grumpy, which could have been because they had gas or something. And there's no way to see that online. Like, and I don't know.
I didn't think you were going to go there, but I appreciate that you did. There's somebody had to bring this show, from the highbrow back to where it belongs.
That's right.
Right smack dab as low of a brow as possible.
I always have time for a fart joke. Point being, it was actually relevant to this topic there's no way that's where online games struggle is that reading of the body language and and then the other point that you just brought up that let me not belabor this point too much, but the breaking the immersion of the game. I will hold on to it too long. We're so immersed, we've lost where the hell we are in reality. That's too far. I have allowed things to go too far. There's no way to know in an online game or in really what we've been provided here to know if that's where we were at of we are so immersed we've lost the thread, or if it was just a quick miscommunication or, and this is where, Matt, even though you and I approach these things differently, I think I never find fault with your stance because you always err on the side of let's make sure everybody's clear. And
Yeah.
I am very aware that, like, nope, I will risk that risk, and it's not always to the betterment of my game.
Well, clearly, it's not always the betterment of my game to go my way. So, I mean, yeah, I respect the fact that you can endure a level of discomfort at the table on the part of your players that leads to great outcomes, because you can like bank discomfort for longer than I can, in a way that when players finally solve the puzzle or get the thing or complete the quest, there is a sense of accomplishment because they've worked through this discomfort. Like, and I want to be very clear that like that discomfort, I don't mean like physical discomfort, or
Right.
like I'm talking about like discomfort as far as like what the hell is going on. But I just think that there's something to both of our styles. I mean, obviously I am constantly talking about transparency and information and all this stuff, but
Right.
but ultimately, I think both of us are on the same page that this listener probably did the right thing.
Well, let's come back and wrap it up, and we'll answer that very question.
Adventurers, heroes, and questionably employed rogues. Let me ask you something. Why is it easier to find a +1 longsword than a razor that doesn't cost a king's ransom? Well, enter Gold Piece Shave Club, where you get a premium shaving kit that actually fits your budget. It doesn't require you to loot a dragon's hoard. Here's the deal. Once a month, a perfectly packed box arrives at your doorstep, filled with top-notch razors and blades and shaving cream so smooth you'll swear a bard was rubbing it on your face. It's everything you need to stay sharp, minus the gimmicks of those ridiculous old blades and contraptions that you see elsewhere. Seriously, do those things shave or just cast scorching ray on your wallet? Now, I know what some of you clever adventurers are thinking. Wouldn't it be better to use one of those old-fashioned single-blade razors? Wouldn't that be cheaper in the long run? Yeah, of course it would. But do those razors arrive in a cool monthly box with a snazzy logo and a note that says, "You're a legend, kid"? I didn't think so. Gold Piece Shave Club isn't about shaving smarter, it's about shaving cooler. Plus, we accept gold pieces, gems, and occasionally the odd cursed artifact. No other shave clubs can say that, can they? So whether you're prepping for a royal audience, a bard's love ballad, or just trying to look a little bit less like a bugbear, Gold Piece Shave Club has your back and your face. Sign up today at goldpieceshaveclub.com and use the code SMOOTHROLL for 10% off your first order. Gold Piece Shave Club. Because sure, there are cheaper ways, but what's the fun in that? All right, Jody, let's bring this topic into the light and see whether or not we're on the same page or a different page. Anyways, do you think that the listener did the right thing, Jody?
Hey, man, it's your table. Just like do what you
want. Oh, there it is, man.
I'm impressed we got this far without making that joke. Worst piece of advice on the internet.
Your table, dude.
Do what you want. Do I think you did the right thing? And as I said kind of in our wrap up, dear listener, thank you first for sending in your question and letting us fumble around with it in the dark. Yeah, I think you did, because you erred on the side of clarity. Did you potentially lose a little bit of a cool drama moment? Did you lose a little mystery? Yeah. And there's some nuance in tone and things like that maybe we just don't know and don't see. But my caution as the GM, who loves to lead players into liminal decision spaces and watch them go, I'm just going to start pulling all the threads, you avoided that problem. You prevented that from happening. So GM, you looked out for your player. You did what you felt was right to help them make an informed decision. While I might have made a different call in the moment, I cannot knock or fault that decision in any way. So you did right by your player. And at the end of the day, it sounds like you guys had a pretty good time killing some gnolls. And what was the other faction?
Yeah, I know. What the heck? Give us some more deets. Wouldn't it be hilarious if I if I was like, I think it was the wrong decision?
Idiot.
Given everything I've said, no, I think it was the right decision. But I do want to point out that despite the fact that I am sort of staunchly in the that was the right call, that I have a recent experience that is not a proof of concept. So you can take it too far, and just like anything, taking it to the extreme will lead you down a dark path, possibly filled with ganoles. I love a ganole.
Who doesn't love a ganole? All right, dear friends, as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in our discussion today that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experience from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, I don't know, like the one we just did, head over to the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadow Dark Discord channel, and you can message us there. Look for the links to any materials we referenced in this episode in the thread or in the show notes. And if you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can reach out to Jody on the Shadow Dark Facebook page under the handle Pezman, and you can message Matt via Discord using the handle SCMatt. Until next time, just have fun, man.
Now I got to do this super fast. Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production and it's not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadow Dark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.